In the fifth and sixth trumpets in Revelation, we've encountered some powerful tales. In the fifth, the locusts were said to have tails with stingers like scorpions, and in their tails they had the power to torment people. While in the sixth, we're told that the power of the lion-headed horses was in their mouths and in their tails. For their tails were like snakes, having heads with which they inflict injury. Now, while terrifying these tails may be, neither compares to what we encounter in chapter 12 with the tail of the dragon. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. What does that even mean? Well, let's start with the obvious. The dragon is powerful, but with clear limits. With his tail, he swept down a third of the stars, but not all of them. It's also important to remember the vision of this dragon, like the woman of verse 1, is to be understood as a sign. They're symbolic and point to some deeper reality. Now, the baby this dragon was attempting to devour in the second half of verse 4 was not called a sign, but is the Son, who is Jesus. I love what Eugene Peterson said of this text. The nativity cannot be sentimentalized into coziness, not domesticated into worldliness. This is not the nativity story we grew up with, but it is the nativity story all the same. Jesus' birth excites more than wonder, it excites evil. Now, the reason evil is excited is because evil knows that this baby's birth heralds its demise. Of course, we talked about that last week. Right now, we're talking tales. Now, however this sweeping tale is to be interpreted, it is not something that will happen on the last day, like Revelation 6:13. The reason for such an assumption, as I mentioned, verse 4 and 5 tell the story of Christ's birth. And there's not a time prior to Christ's birth when a third of the literal stars fell from heaven. Thus, we're compelled to determine whether the stars in this context reference the Israelites, angels, fallen angels, or something else. Some will explain this passage in terms of the primordial war in heaven, when Satan rebelled against God and took with him a third of the angelic host in rebellion. Thus, the stars would be fallen angels. Others take a different interpretation, emphasizing the stars as representative of people. An example would be the suggestion that this is the persecution of God's people under Antiochus Epiphanes during the 2nd century BC. Now, often they'll make a connection of the stars and the dragons here in Revelation to the little horn in Daniel 8, which grew until it reached the hosts of the heavens, and it threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled on them. As I've done previously, they'll point to Revelation 12 verse 1 and the 12 stars that crown the woman's head as symbolic of the 12 tribes of Israel. So in this understanding, the dragon casting down the stars, trampling on them, according to Daniel 8, might be understood as a persecution of Israel. Now, how one interprets the stars is curious, at least it is to me, but ultimately not the point of the passage. The point is what happens after, and to which I've already alluded. Return again to verse 5, we're told of the woman, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. Now, I've made the point several times now, the child is Jesus. But this will be our question for next time. Why is it that the whole story of Jesus is collapsed into just one verse of a few words? Why jump from his birth to his ascension? Well, that's where we'll pick up. Happy New Year.